Hello, we're going to show you a few glacial features. Now to start with, we're looking here at the Tetons, which have some great glacial features. So these are the byproduct of alpine glaciation, which is also known as mountain or valley glaciation. So for today, just treat those as more or less of synonyms. But looking at a few glacial features might help to start with something closer to home. And so we're going to be looking at temp really quickly. Now, yes, there are glacial features on Mount Timpanogos, but currently there are not any active glaciers on Mount Timpanogos. So the definition of a glacier is that it has to be massive enough that it can flow under its own weight. And what we see for temp, we'll actually go ahead and do some time-lapse stuff here. So yes, a lot of people look at these snowfields on Timpanogos and call those glaciers, but they're just snowfields. And so if we look at this at various times, so here we're looking at what it was in September of 2018, you can see those snowfields have completely melted away. So yes, no active glaciers on Timp. The glaciers have long melted away. There is what's called a rock glacier on Mount Timpanogos, and these are basically where you have talus that might have been essentially cemented together by ice. They can sometimes be relics of past glaciation. But either way, it's called a rock glacier. And rock glaciers can behave at a time like true glaciers. And so you can see that there seems to be this lobe that has flowed downhill. But based on current study, it doesn't appear to be active now. So it does not have enough mass of ice within it to flow. And so it's a dead rock glacier, if you will. Okay. So yes, we have this semicircular valley here where a glacier did form and start to compact. You have all that leftover snowpack that compacted and started to flow downhill. And this, again, is called a cirque. Now we have another cirque over here. And so any ridges that separate one cirque from another, those are called arêtes. And any peaks that are surrounded by multiple cirques, and that the arêtes are converging on the peak, we call those horns. And so there's a few examples of horns, and then lots of cirques and arêtes along the Wasatch. Now, it's important to note, though, as we look at temp, that all of these cirques, these glacial valleys and everything else, are mostly facing northward. So it's important to remember that for glacial ice, that it forms where there's enough snowpack, and it's easiest to get enough snowpack if it is in kind of a shadier spot. And so assuming that we got even coverage of snow across all of Timpanogos, you're going to have more snow left behind, and we can see that in these views here. More snow is going to be left behind in the shadier parts. And so the south-facing slopes, the snow just melts away too quickly. And so, even during the Ice Age, the only major glaciation on Timpanogos was all facing north, all on the shadier part of the mountain. That's something that we see quite regularly around the world, at least for the northern hemisphere. It'd be the reverse in the southern hemisphere. So let's go ahead and look at probably the best example of one of these glacially sculpted areas. So we have a horn here. This is the Matterhorn in Switzerland, more precisely along the Swiss-Italian border. We'll go ahead and turn the border off there so it looks a little more even there. But we have this peak. Again, horns are often kind of pyramid shaped, and you have cirques surrounding it. And again, often the north facing cirques are larger and especially deeper. And you can see that for this one here. You can see again how this area is shaded for much of the day. And so that's why the snow and ice was able to accumulate there and form the glacial ice that started to flow downhill. You can see there's still an active glacier there, even though much of these other glacial valleys have already melted away. The glaciers have melted away. And so that's the Matterhorn. And so again, you're going to have cirques on basically all sides of the horns. Looks like it's freaking out a little bit there. Let's go ahead and force that to, it got confused where it's at. Let's pause this a second. Okay, so back to the Matterhorn again. So remember that these glacially sculpted peaks, which are surrounded by cirques, again, the Matterhorn has cirques on multiple sides. We got one here, we got that big one in the back there, we got another cirque here, another big cirque on the Italian side of the border. Okay, so the horns are surrounded by cirques. The cirques are the semicircular valleys where the glacier starts, and then adjacent cirques are separated by arêtes. Now we are in Yosemite Valley. You can see Half Dome there in the background. But this is a great example of a glacial valley. Remember that glacial valleys are strongly U-shaped typically, so flatter, wider bottomed. And this is as opposed to the more V-shaped stream-cut canyons. Now, oftentimes when you have multiple glaciers that were coming together, these glaciers, if you have a smaller one coming in on the side, so kind of a tributary glacier, if you will, this often will not carve as deep of a valley as the main glacial valley would, and so you will have this smaller valley kind of perched up along the side of the big valley, and that's what we have here. And so we call this a hanging valley. Hanging valleys will often have waterfalls coming out of them. And so I may have mentioned before when we were looking at waterfalls in the past, that waterfalls, you typically have those rocks of different strengths. I mentioned that was the case if you're not in a glaciated area. If you're in a glaciated area, well, it's usually coming out of a hanging valley. Now, also we see these streams that are coming down these valleys. Now, these streams came later. The glacier carved out the valley, and then the stream just flowed down the path of least resistance, so the valley was already there. And so we call these streams flowing down valleys that did not carve. We call these misfit streams. And so most glacial valleys will have a misfit stream flowing down it. And in the case of any that have these hanging valleys, again, you'll usually get lots of waterfalls. So we can see some great examples of, again, a hanging valley there, nice waterfall coming out of it. So all the waterfalls that Yosemite is famous for, these are all coming out of hanging valleys. And if you look at most major mountainous areas in the world, most had some glaciation during the Ice Age. And the glaciation is responsible for all the really rugged looks that we love about the mountains. And so that's true whether we're talking about Yosemite here, that's true whether we're talking about the Tetons, the Uintas, the more beautiful parts of the Wasatch. Again, these are all the byproduct of this alpine or valley glaciation. So here we can see in the Tetons, again, this great example of a glacial valley, again, strongly U-shaped, that is as opposed to the more V-shaped stream-cut canyons.